During school years, history might have seemed like a rather boring subject. However, the older we get, the more interesting it becomes to learn something new from the distant past. In this video, I invite you to discover some amazing historical facts that many have never heard of. Enjoy your viewing. It's hard to find someone who doesn't love ice cream. This dessert is associated with childhood, joy, and happiness, and for Americans, it became a unique symbol of World War II. Every soldier in the war faced great difficulties. To boost their spirits, the U.S. Navy came up with an unusual but very simple method, providing soldiers with ice cream. Surprisingly, this method worked. Wounded Navy fighters recovered faster in military hospitals, and during battles, they could maintain a good mood. A special barge was created to deliver ice cream to military ships. The speed and volume of production on this vessel were impressive. The barge produced at least 38 liters of ice cream every 7 minutes. Sometimes there were disruptions in the supply of the treat, and soldiers learned to make it themselves. Pilots would place a can of milk mixture in the weapon compartment of a heavy B-17 bomber and fly out on missions. While they were in flight at high altitudes, the ice cream would churn and freeze, and upon returning to base, soldiers could relax and enjoy the resulting dessert. Even the enemies of the U.S. knew how important ice cream was for American soldiers. So the Japanese lowered the price of this treat to make its production unprofitable, and in Italy during the war, ice cream production was banned. At the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century, the demand for dental services significantly increased. People consumed a lot of sugar, leading to the development of cavities and enamel destruction, and they turned to doctors for tooth removal. This was when convenient dental prostheses began to appear. The business was very much in demand. Prostheses were made from ivory and various alloys, but those made from real human teeth were especially popular. Of course, there were few people willing to give their teeth for the production of prostheses, and grave robbers somewhat alleviated the situation, but there was still not enough material. On June 18, 1815, the Battle of Waterloo took place, Napoleon Bonaparte's last major battle. As a result of the military actions, at least 40,000 soldiers died. Their bodies remained on the battlefield, and looters devised a gruesome plan to extract teeth from the dead and sell them to prosthetic manufacturers. Prostheses made from ivory could only be afforded by the incredibly wealthy, while those made from human teeth were quite affordable. However, by the mid-19th century, the use of human teeth gradually ceased as new materials began to appear in dentistry that matched the quality and durability of real teeth. Thomas Edison was the greatest inventor of the 19th century. He created the phonograph and the electric light bulb, and also improved the telephone, telegraph, and cinematographic equipment. Edison was granted 1093 patents in the USA and over 3,000 in other countries. In 1890, Edison decided to combine two seemingly incompatible things, a phonograph and a doll, thus creating the world's first talking toy. Edison's dolls were about 60 centimeters tall. Inside their metal bodies was a phonograph that was operated by a hand crank. The dolls recited various children's rhymes and even prayers, which were recorded on the phonograph. The toys were voiced not by children or actors, but by ordinary factory workers who altered their voices to sound childlike. Of course, the sound quality left much to be desired, and many people were frightened by the fact that the dolls could talk. However, Edison's invention did not become popular at the time for another reason. The production of such dolls was quite expensive. In stores, the cost of these talking wonders was about $200 in today's money. Moreover, the toys were not durable and broke easily. A total of more than 7,500 talking dolls were produced, of which only 500 were sold. Ketchup is one of the most popular sauces in the world. It first appeared in China more than 1,500 years ago. However, this sauce was completely different from what we know today and did not contain tomatoes. Over its long history, ketchup has boasted a huge number of interesting facts. But perhaps the most surprising is that in the 19th century it was sold as medicine. Between 1820 and 1830, ketchup was sold in pharmacies. This strange use of the sauce spread thanks to a doctor from Ohio named John Cook. He claimed that ketchup helped with stomach pains, as well as preventing baldness and eczema. Of course, no scientific evidence of its effectiveness was provided. However, it's worth noting that tomatoes from which ketchup is made contain lycopene. Elderly people often experience a deficiency of this substance in their bodies. But to regulate lycopene balance, it would be more beneficial to eat fresh tomatoes, as ketchup contains a very high amount of harmful sugar. The chemical radioactive element radium was discovered in 1898 by scientists Pierre and Marie Curie. In the early 20th century, radium was not only considered harmless, but even beneficial. It was included in many products, such as chocolate, toothpaste, and cosmetic creams. Moreover, in 1917, the American corporation U.S. Radium began manufacturing watch dials painted with radioluminescent paint. For this work, young women were hired at the factory. None of them were warned about the danger, and furthermore, the workers were not provided with the necessary personal protective equipment required for handling radioactive elements. The process of decorating the watch dials at U.S. Radium factories was carried out in several stages. First, the women mixed glue, water, and a powder containing radium sulfate and zinc sulfide. Then, they applied the resulting paint to the watch dials using camel hairbrushes. Since the brushes quickly lost their shape, factory management forced the workers to reshape them using their lips or tongues. Sometimes, for fun, the women painted their nails and teeth with the paint, as they were not informed about the danger of contact with radium. Naturally, such interaction with the radioactive element led to serious diseases among the corporation's workers. Many of these women later suffered from anemia, frequent fractures, and jaw destruction. This syndrome later became known as Radium Jaw. Some women filed lawsuits. Despite attempts to deny the accusations, the corporation's owners were still found guilty. According to the settlement, the Radium girls were awarded a one-time payment of $10,000 and a pension of $600 monthly. However, no amount of money could restore their health. It is thought that most of these women would have refused to work at the factory if they had been warned of the potential consequences of working with radium. Herman Webster Mudgett, better known by the pseudonym Henry Holmes, became the first officially registered serial killer in the USA. From a young age, he exhibited cruelty towards animals, and after qualifying as a doctor, he began conducting financial scams using corpses. In 1886, Herman adopted the name Henry Holmes. It was then that he met Dr. Holton, who owned a pharmacy. Later, Holmes bought several buildings around his friend's pharmacy and established a hotel, which locals called the Castle. From the outside and even inside, this building seemed quite ordinary. Hotel rooms, shops, pharmacies, and cafes. Only Holmes knew all the secret places where he committed his crimes. Holmes's victims were mainly women, but sometimes he also killed men who rented rooms with their lovers in his hotel. Holmes would capture his victims, lock them in special torture rooms, torture them for a long period, and then brutally kill them. Some victims were sent to soundproof rooms filled with gas, where they died of suffocation. Holmes disposed of the bodies through a chute to the base of the building, where he later dissected them into skeletons, which he then sold as educational aids to medical institutions. In 1894, Holmes was arrested, and 2 years later, he was sentenced to death. The number of his victims is estimated to be between 20 to 350 people, though he confessed to 27 murders. The story of Mary Toft, the woman who gave birth to rabbits, is quite peculiar. Nowadays, few would believe that such a thing is possible, but at the time, many doctors witnessed the woman producing animals, and therefore believed in the authenticity of the case. Mary Toft was an ordinary resident of Surrey, England. In 1726, at the age of 25, she was pregnant with her fourth child. Something went wrong, and she had a miscarriage, after which an unknown scientific anomaly occurred in her body. The next morning, she called midwives to her home and reported that she was going into labor. The midwives were shocked to see that she gave birth to parts of rabbit bodies. This incident came to the attention of the local doctor, John Howard. He wrote an article in the newspaper, reporting this sensation, and invited experienced doctors from London to Surrey to study the unusual woman. Howard himself continued to doubt such an anomaly, but 2 months later he personally delivered another birth for Toft and saw with his own eyes how 3 legs of a tabby cat and 1 rabbit leg emerged from the woman. A few days later, Toft extracted a whole dozen rabbits from herself. This story reached King George I himself. He personally ordered 2 of his best doctors, Henry Davenant and Nathaniel St. Andre, to go to Surrey. They, like Howard, witnessed rabbits emerging from the womb of a regular woman. Therefore, Toft's case was recognized as unique and strange, yet real. After a long investigation, it was finally revealed that Mary Toft was a fraudster. She was trying to gain money and worldwide fame, and for this purpose, she bought rabbits at the market, cut them into pieces, and then inserted these fragments into herself to later give birth to them. In the 18th century, during the cholera outbreak, many people were afraid of being buried alive. This fear prompted inventors to create various devices that could be installed in a coffin and could help a person escape from the grave if they were buried there by mistake, for example, after coming out of a coma. The first safety coffin was made by order of Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick in 1792. The coffin was equipped with a window for sunlight, a special ventilation tube, and a lock, the key to which was supposed to be in the deceased's pocket. In 1798, it was proposed in Germany to install tubes in all coffins with a rope tied to church bells. With it, a person buried alive could attract attention. Additionally, a priest conducting rounds of graves could independently find the living in graves by the absence of a corpse smell. One of the inventors of safety coffins was Dr. Adolf Gutzmuth. In 1822, he conducted several experiments with his own burial in manufactured coffins. During one of them, he was even able to have lunch using a special tube. Safety coffins were constantly modified. The most modern of them was patented by Fabrizio Caselli. This invention was equipped with an alarm signal, spotlight, intercom system, breathing apparatus, heart monitor, and stimulator. The Great Depression in the USA began in 1929 after the stock market crash and lasted for 10 years. This period was marked by massive unemployment and poverty. Income levels fell so much that even many previously wealthy people found themselves below the poverty line. During the Great Depression, people had to survive, and they found various ways to do so. American housewives noticed that sacks for potatoes and flour were made from cotton, which meant they could be used not only for storing food. Soon, bags and towels were sewn from burlap, and then clothing. Before being used for clothing, the sacks were thoroughly washed. But even this did not help to remove stamps and inscriptions. However, people had no other opportunity to access affordable fabric, so they paid no attention to this. After some time, companies producing sacks learned about the unconventional use of their products and decided to gain additional benefits. They began to produce sacks with various patterns and designs, and the inscriptions were made with washable ink. After that, there was a real boom in burlap clothing in America. But when the situation in the country normalized, people quickly forgot about such unusual outfits. After the invention of the daguerreotype in 1839, portrait photography became very popular. At the same time, not everyone could afford the services of a photographer, but a photograph allowed for the preservation of the memory of deceased loved ones. For this reason, people saved a certain amount of money so that after the death of a family member, a family portrait could be taken. This gave rise to what is known as post-mortem photography. The first photograph in this eerie genre was taken in 1840. It was created by the French photographer Hippolyte Bayard, who depicted himself semi-nude as a drowned man. Photographs of deceased children were particularly popular with photographers. In the Victorian era, the child mortality rate was very high, so parents turned to photographers to get the only photograph of their child, even if deceased. People in post-mortem photographs looked as if they were alive, sometimes for realism. The photographer would paint eyes on their closed eyelids. Deceased adults were seated on chairs or sofas, surrounded by their family. Children were usually photographed alone in beautiful outfits, with flowers or toys nearby. Nowadays, post-mortem photography seems like a grim hobby of a bygone era. But back then, people had no other way to keep a memento of their loved one, so it would be inappropriate to judge this genre. From the 17th to the 19th century, there was a strange fashion in Europe for books bound in human skin. Today, at least 18 such editions are preserved in libraries worldwide. The most famous among them is an 1829 edition bound in the skin of murderer William Burke, kept at the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. William Burke was a serial killer from Edinburgh, who operated with a partner named William Hare. Over 10 months in 1828, they committed 16 murders. They killed their victims for profit, selling the corpses to anatomists for scientific research. In 1829, the criminals were caught and sentenced to death by hanging. Afterwards, Burke's body was handed over to Professor Alexander Monroe, who conducted a public dissection of the murderer and then removed his skin to create the future book binding. This story seems very gruesome, but creating bindings from the skin of criminals was a common practice among European anatomists. Over time, the use of human skin was considered unethical, and such practices ceased. Marilyn Monroe was an idol to thousands of viewers. To this day, she continues to be an ideal of female beauty. However, behind her stunning appearance and dazzling smile lay a very unhappy life. In her early childhood, Marilyn, born Norma Jean, ended up in an orphanage because her mother believed she could not afford to feed her daughter. Eventually, her biological mother took her back, but soon after she was admitted to a clinic for the mentally ill, and Marilyn was left an orphan once again. A lack of love in childhood significantly impacted her later life. Marilyn sought someone who could truly love her, and due to her trustfulness, she was often deceived by men. Her difficult childhood also reflected on her mental health. Marilyn suffered from insomnia, nightmares, chronic depression, and anxiety disorders. The great actress dreamed of children, but she was also unlucky in this respect. All 4 of her pregnancies ended in miscarriages. All these misfortunes led to Marilyn Monroe becoming dependent on alcohol and drugs. At the age of 36, the actress passed away. The official cause was suicide, having taken an excessive dose of barbiturates. After World War I, a large number of Australian soldiers were given land plots in the western part of Australia where they began to grow wheat. The first few years, people lived a peaceful life farming, but then everything changed. First, during the Great Depression, the former servicemen faced the absence of previously paid subsidies. In 1932, the situation worsened when about 20,000 emus migrated to their lands. The birds devastated everything in their path. They destroyed crops, knocked down fences, and depleted water supplies. Enduring this invasion of emus was impossible, so it was decided to start a real war against the emus, which became known in history as the Great Emu War. Attempts to exterminate the troublesome birds turned into a real problem. It turned out that killing them was not easy, and here's why. Emus are very intelligent birds, capable of quickly reacting to approaching danger. It's also worth noting that they are among the largest birds in the world. They can reach a height of 180 centimeters and weigh up to 45 kilograms. Additionally, emus live in flocks and can run at speeds up to 48 kilometers per h. After several unsuccessful attempts to deal with the birds independently, the former soldiers appealed to the Australian Minister of Defence, George Pearce. Pierce sent an army equipped with Lewis machine guns to fight the emus. But even armed soldiers could not drive these birds away. Several strategies were developed to defeat the emus, but none of them worked. When the emus sensed danger, they managed to escape and then returned again and continued to destroy the wheat. You may be surprised, but in the end, the Minister of Defense admitted defeat, declaring that he could not continue this war as it was senseless and financially costly. As you can see, sometimes a seemingly weak opponent turns out to be much stronger and smarter than it appears. The 16th century was an era of geographical discoveries. Many colonists from the Old World went to America in search of riches and a new home. However, luck did not smile on everyone. In 1587, 117 Englishmen led by John White landed on the shore of Rowan Oak Island. There they established their own settlement. But the local natives were not pleased with such neighbors and began to attack the colonists. The English realized they needed help, and therefore asked White to return to England for reinforcements. Unfortunately, White managed to return to the island with reinforcements only in 1590. Then the Englishmen discovered that there was no trace left of their settlement. All the people and houses had disappeared. At first, White thought that the settlement had been attacked by natives, but he found no signs of attack. However, he discovered a strange inscription on one of the wooden posts, Croatoan. The long search by the English led nowhere. Historians believe that the people began to go mad from isolation and helplessness and decided to join the local natives, adopting the belief in a deity named Croatoan. Interestingly, some sailors reported that among the indigenous people of the island, they surprisingly encountered individuals with blonde hair. The story of the witch trials in the New England town of Salem began in January 1692 when two daughters of Pastor Samuel Parris fell ill with a strange sickness. The children started to contort unnaturally, hide in corners and scream, and when priests recited prayers, they covered their ears and emitted sinister sounds. Following the pastor's daughters, several more children suffered from a similar affliction. The priests concluded that the illness was a curse of witches. The first suspect was a woman named Tituba, who worked as a servant for the Parrises. Besides her, two other women, Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, were also accused of witchcraft. All three were convenient suspects, as Tituba was of a different nationality. Sarah Good was a beggar, and Sarah Osborne was a seriously ill widow. Additionally, all had long neglected to attend church. The three women were interrogated and examined for witch marks. In January 1692, several more accused appeared, who were found guilty and sentenced to death. Interestingly, before her execution, Sarah Good promised one of the priests that after her death, he too would die, and the Lord would drench him in his blood. Her curse came true, and the priest soon indeed died, choking on his own blood. Following this trial, others ensued. Over the course of 6 months of active proceedings against witches, 31 people were convicted, 19 of whom were hanged. The Salem trials were just one episode in the mass witch hunts that led to the killing of a large number of innocent people. The romance between the court lady Inês de Castro and King Pedro I of Portugal is often compared to the love story of Romeo and Juliet, as, according to legend, these lovers could only marry after Inés's death. Inés de Castro came from a noble family. At a young age, she became a lady-in-waiting to Prince Pedro I's future wife, Constance of Castile. Prince Pedro fell in love with Inés before his marriage to Constance in 1340. They met secretly, but after a few years their affair became known. Pedro's father, King Afonso IV, opposed the relationship, and Constance was also displeased. However, Pedro remained faithful to his beloved. In 1345, Constance died in childbirth, and then Inés moved to the Santa Clara Monastery in Coimbra. Afterwards, she gave birth to 3 sons and a daughter with Pedro I. King Afonso IV began to fear that Inés's children would claim the throne, despite their illegitimacy. Therefore, he decided to kill his son's favorite, but at the last moment, He relented and spared her life. However, he later changed his mind, and in January 1355, Inez was killed in front of her children. When Pedro learned about this, he was enraged and rebelled against his father. A civil war erupted in Portugal, after which King Afonso IV died. Pedro ascended to the throne in 1357, and in 1360, he ordered Inez's remains to be brought from Coimbra to the palace, as he wanted everyone to see his queen. As soon as her skeleton was delivered, Pedro personally dressed Inez in royal garments, seated her on the throne, placed a crown on her head, and ordered all the courtiers to kiss the hem of their queen's dress. After this ceremony, Pedro buried Inez in the royal tomb intended for both of them. Marie Curie is a renowned female scientist, thanks to whom radium and polonium were discovered. For her contributions to science, she was awarded the Nobel Prize twice. It's noteworthy that Marie Curie was the first woman in history to receive this award. Marie Skłodowska-Curie was born in Warsaw in 1867 to a family of teachers. From an early age, the girl showed an inclination towards science. She graduated from high school with honors, but she could not enroll in Warsaw University because it did not accept women. However, this did not stop Marie, and at the age of 24, thanks to her sister, she was able to move to Paris and enroll in the Sorbonne. After graduating from university, the young woman began working on a project studying the magnetic properties and chemical composition of steel. She was joined in this research by a young scientist, Pierre Curie, who soon became Marie's husband. The Curie family worked on various experiments for a long time. In 1898, they discovered two chemical elements that exhibited radioactivity. They named these elements polonium, after Marie's homeland, Poland, and radium. Marie dedicated her entire life to working with radioactive elements, which severely impacted her health. At the age of 66, she died from aplastic anemia caused by chronic radiation sickness.
Look for the clear light of truth.
In the modern world, mummies hold tremendous value for science. In the Middle Ages, they were also highly valued, but not as objects of cultural and historical heritage, but as ingredients for making unique medicines. This may seem strange now, but back then, mummies were indeed considered a panacea. An amazing medicine made from the remains of ancient Egyptians was sold in pharmacies for several centuries. This unconventional method of treating all diseases with mummies came to Europe from the East, where Persian and Arabic medicine were considered the most advanced. In the 11th century, Italian scholars found a treatise by the Arabic physician Avicenna, in which he described a remedy capable of curing nausea, ulcers, various injuries, and much more. The physician called this medicine mummy, but did not reveal the secret of its production. It's worth noting that in the East, mummy referred to natural bitumen, which was extracted from the Dead Sea. However, Europeans decided that Arabic physicians really added mummified bodies to medicines, mixing them with aloe juice. Gradually, due to this misunderstanding, tomb raiders began to take not only jewels and various artifacts, but also human remains with them. By the 16th century, a real market for mummies had formed. People believed that these bodies possessed special energy, so they willingly took unusual medicines and even powder prepared from ground remains. Such demand generated an incredible number of offers for miraculous medicinal products, but most of them were already made not from Egyptian mummies, but from camel meat. In the 18th century, scientists declared that treatment with mummy was, in fact, a fraud. After this, the sale of such medicines abruptly stopped in Europe. In 1775, the German-Swedish chemist Carl Wilhelm Scheele invented a pigment called Scheele's green. In 1814, the pigment was improved to Paris green, also known as emerald green pigment. This color caused a real sensation among the residents of Victorian England. It was used in the production of clothing, interior items, and much more. This pigment was indeed very beautiful, especially under the light of lamps, but it was later discovered to also be deadly dangerous. Gradually, the population of England began to suffer from various diseases, resulting in many deaths. Most fatalities occurred among workers at various factories who had to come into contact with the pigment. It then became clear that the cause of the diseases and deaths of the English was the fashion for Paris green. It turns out that the base of the pigment was arsenic. This chemical element is very toxic. Arsenic poisoning leads to severe diseases of the nervous system and internal organs. Certainly, after it became clear how dangerous Paris green was, it was banned for domestic use in many countries. Scientists recently made a sensational discovery that is very hard to believe. It turns out that the campaigns of the world-renowned military leader and founder of the Mongol Empire, Genghis Khan, led to climate change on our planet. But how could this happen? While studying Antarctic ice, scientists noticed that between 1200 and 1470, there was a sharp decrease in carbon levels in the atmosphere. It was later found that this change occurred after the forces of Genghis Khan invaded Asia. As a result of the brutal bloodshed, at least 40 million people died. Additionally, large areas of agricultural land were destroyed and subsequently turned into forests. Thus, the amount of carbon was reduced by 700 million tons. Such significant changes in the atmosphere, occurring in less than a century, significantly affected the Earth's climate. Researchers have found that at least 4 historical events influenced the reduction of carbon in the atmosphere. These include the Mongol invasion of Asia, the outbreak of the plague in 14th century Europe, the colonization of America, and the fall of the Ming dynasty in China. However, it has been proven that Genghis Khan's campaign led to the most significant climate changes. Tutomu Yamaguchi managed to survive the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. During World War II, Tutomu Yamaguchi worked as an engineer for Mitsubishi. In August 1945, he was on a business trip in Hiroshima, where he was involved in a project to build a tanker. On the last day of his trip, Yamaguchi was about to head to the station. Stepping outside the shipyard, he noticed bombers in the sky. Fortunately, the man managed to find a ditch and lie down in it. Yamaguchi survived the explosion, being 3 kilometers from the epicenter. That day, about 80,000 people died in Hiroshima. After receiving first aid in one of the bomb shelters, Yamaguchi took a train home to Nagasaki. On August 9th, he went to work. And at 11:02 a.m., he once again found himself near the epicenter of the explosion. Thus, the Japanese man managed to survive 2 atomic bombings. Yamaguchi was granted hibakusha status, a term for people who survived the bombings. After the incidents, Yamaguchi suffered from radiation sickness, but despite this, he lived to be 93 years old. And that's all for now. If you liked this video, don't forget to rate it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell. Your activity is the best reward for me. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye.